Final review of Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, Tactical Espionage Operations. After 15 hours of gameplay, it's time for Peace Walker to become part of my gamer chronicle as a completed game. Now, as with all series iterations, Peace Walker didn't do exactly the same thing as its predecessors. It returned the sound radar system from Portable Ops, it did this mother base management thing where you assign recruits to teams in order to build better resources, and one of the other ways it differs is that it adds in the generic vehicle boss fights that only serve to feel like out-of-place supply runs. The story was paced a lot differently since the game was shorter. It started in at an incredibly slow pace and then exploded upwards later with added characters and plot threads popping out all over the place, which seemed odd when we were just following a delivery for the first 4 hours fighting carriers and tanks. Just like Portable Ops, you know, these two games are really similar, but that might be because they're both on the PSP. Anyway, it does the regional exploration mission structure, which combines the MGS4 World Tour with the MGS developing facility structure into something that works, but isn't that enthralling as a location. The introduced characters were pretty good, the rebels less than Huey and the villains who had actual characters and more personality than Chico and Amanda, and especially Cecile. And like always, the Metal Gear project in this game is meshed well into global politics of the period, making the player's actions seem like they're far more important than they actually are, keeping people invested in the story. Well, now that I've started waffling about this game's particulars, let's just get to the scores before I start giving away all my opinions in the start. Gameplay. Now, this game, compared to the entire series, Peace Walker definitely came out as one of the better iterations since it took the concepts of Metal Gear Solid and actually crunched them into a simpler format that makes it almost feel like a more pure version of an MGS game. The guns have been reduced in quantity, making them easier to use with an improved aiming system and actually explain CQC attacks. The guards are nearly perfect in their AI in use, capturing people for recruitment is simplified as well, making it incredibly easy to capture a lot of people along with putting them into the roster as simple as pushing a couple of buttons. Also, it's not that important as it was in Portable Ops to have a competent team of people working together. The health system is fairer than in Portable Ops, actually giving rations some usefulness in 1s instead of 3s. The bosses that were actually designed with some care were interesting and intriguing in their own rights, probably because there was a tiny cast of those compared to the generic boss fights of Escort, Captain, and Vehicle that still baffle me as to why they exist in an MGS game. But then I remembered something someone said about this iteration in the series, and that it was actually T-rated, and then I found the answer of why these things exist. They exist because Kojima was really pulling for that T rating with Peace Walker, which means that you can't shoot a lot of people, or you get the M-hammer. And even then, I'm further baffled about why Kojima decided that this one should be the T-rater. I mean, this is like the 7th or 8th iteration of the series, and you decide to go for the major update to the format here for a small branching of the audience? I mean, what the hell were you thinking? Other than that deal, the mission structure follows up from Portable Ops, but makes it a little more difficult in order to create a challenging environment where sneaking around is the best option with some sort of stunning weapon. So Peace Walker definitely fixes a lot of the quibbles I've had about the series as a whole, and rounds itself off as a good game. A good game that I'd give a 7 1/3 Triforces for its mechanics. Story. Starting out in Peace Walker, we are given a contract to destroy Peace Walker by a person calling themselves a professor and Pause, one of his students in their peace proliferating class, and on the way we pick up some rebels that help us find a shipment of nuclear devices that Big Boss follows into the Costa Rican wilderness, to where the plot finally starts kicking in after 4 hours of bloody build-up. It turns out that the ultimate bad guy is a CIA director by the name of Hot Coldman. Haha, funny. Who's arguing with his lead weapons scientist Huey about the Peace Walker project and its effect on Cold War politics, who is rescued by Big Boss and taken to Mother Base to work for his cause, Soldiers Without Borders. Afterwards, he catches up to a weapons lab being run by Dr. Strangelove, a woman with an unknown attachment to the deceased The Boss who's looking for information relating to her death through the development of a project for Coleman called Mammal Pod, creating an artificial version of The Boss by stuffing a computer with all American gathered intelligence on the agent, with its primary directive being the control center of Peace Walker, a retaliatory nuclear launch device to provide perfect deterrence. After evading capture, Strangelove takes Mammal Pod to a mine converted into a testing facility for Peace Walker, where Big Boss breaks in and attempts to destroy Mammal Pod before being captured by Coleman and forced to escape and do the same thing again. But this time Peace Walker has been completed and is ready for launch. However, Big Boss stops Peace Walker's initial launch, but does not prevent its escape, with Coleman and Strangelove who've kidnapped Pause to take all of them to a Nicaraguan American-controlled military base to begin another launch attempt. Big Boss invades the American base where strangely Soviet guards have been stationed all over the place and finds the communication center of the base just in time to alert all the guards and find out that Peace Walker is preparing for final launch. So after pushing through an exhaustive amount of enemies, Big Boss gets to the control tower where Coldman is entering in the launch data for Peace Walker before being captured by the professor, who turns out to be Vladimir Zadornov, KGB agent, and takes over the project to launch at Cuba to reignite the Cold War. Then, after being captured by Mother Base, Coldman and Zadornov are taken into custody, with Coldman being severely wounded, but before his death, he began the launch of Peace Walker, who now has to be stopped by Big Boss in order to save the world, and in the end, the AI core and Mammal Pod work together to drown Peace Walker and assuage the nuclear threat forever. Now, while the story was enthralling after it started getting on the road, initial looks turned me off, as the first 4 hours again just made it look like a generic stealth game of any other series until the pupa battle made things interesting. The plot really did need the boss overtones and parts in order to make up for its deficiencies as a balancer, because otherwise, this plot would have just been a terrible mess and overall boring, so it's great that Big Boss finally gets that guilt off his mind while saving the world from a nuclear annihilation. Overall, I'd give it a 9 Triforces. Fun? Bosses? There were complete hits and complete misses, so pretty middle of the road. The sneaking was fun with the Titan mechanics, with it being a lot easier to get supplies and stuff when needed, along with an easier target system that gives us the best chance to not alert anybody. The story kept me intrigued enough to get excited for subsequent robot fights, while the difficulty spikes definitely gave some catharsis to that game's parts, as well as much as I griped about the game's generic parts. When it does finally hit the road with some MGS anime style that the fans love to fight, there are some unique moments that drown out the generics into a gray concrete floor strewn with Christmas sweaters. My final verdict is that while like 35% of the game is dull as any other COD clone, the parts that rise above it do make up for that deficiency and made the entire game highly enjoyable, meaning that juxtaposition has a place in video games, and I hope developers pick up on that fact. I'll hand out an 8 2/3 Triforces for this spot. Oh, you wanted to know about the multiplayer elements? Never used them, figured nobody else did as well. Like I need 3 other guys to take on a tank enemy. Yeah, right. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, another PSP game that thankfully got ported to PS3, where its story could be better enjoyed using a sensible controller. It's another entry into the canon of Big Boss, one of the only 2 main characters still living, where his new venture, Soldiers Without Borders, is taking contracts from anyone willing to trust them, which is entirely made up of people similar to the guys he rescued in Portable Ops. This new contract has him eventually taking on nuclear politics at their core, when the main issue is stopping yet another nuke to prove deterrence theory, with some questionability on the concept of unmanned weapons. It took a while to get going, but once it got there, it was pretty good, which goes towards proving that juxtaposition is important in media generally. It used QuickTime events, but they mainly appeared in the game as fun little mini-games which broke down the usual obnoxiousness of the trope, especially when the instant death part of it has been taken off. Peace Walker ended with a final score of 25 out of 30, rivaling its other series entrants for one of the better ones, for not only having one of the best caches of gameplay mechanics fixing older MGS issues, but wrapping that up in an intriguing story about a man trying to prove peace and sell his ideas at the same time, launching a nuke at the world as part of his overall plan. Okay, now that the review is almost over, there is one issue I still have to discuss about this game: Metal Gear ZEKE. Now, I do know what this arc is all about, so I don't need an introduction from the audience. And here's another thing: I am not going to review Metal Gear ZEKE as a boss fight, and here's why. In my professional opinion, Metal Gear ZEKE falls under the term of optional boss, and if I have to grind in any way, shape, or form to fight an optional boss, I will be skipping it on this channel. Grinding at the end of a game is a waste of my time, especially in this case, because for some stupid-ass reason, Kojima thought it best to not only make it optional, but make it canonical as well, because this is where it's revealed that Paz was actually Pacifica Ocean, a double-crosser who was taking ZEKE back to her superiors to use as they please, which apparently comes up later in the canon, as a colleague has made me very much aware. Okay, well, with that dangling thread slashed off, I will leave you guys with the usual victory for gamers, and see you next time for another video game.